Today we're going to talk about decision force and case development, DFC development. In another video, we talked about applying DFCs. We defined DFCs, we talked about their benefits, we talked about how to use them, but now we're going to talk about how do we develop these things. So your first step is to find a suitable historical event. A DFC is something that actually happened. It's something that people experience. It's not made up. So you want to go find a suitable event, something that's going to allow you to talk to teach to the topic of your class, the subject of your course, whatever it is. So the next logical question is, well, where do I go to find some stories? The answer is you've got a ton of options. You can look at command chronologies, you can look at historical accounts, you can look at lessons learned documents, you can look at newspaper articles, you can go to YouTube and find videos. Documentaries are a great place to start. I mean, there's a ton of different places you can look at. One question that comes up sometimes is, can I use my own experience as the basis for a DFC? And the answer is yes, you can, but again, you want to be careful with that. It's easy to distort things. It's easy to see yourself as the hero of your own story. And you're so close to events that you don't have much objectivity. So as you're putting together the case, you might really bias the students unknowingly in thinking one way or another. So a good corrective to that is to have somebody else interview you, have somebody else build the case, have somebody get the facts from you as you understand them, and again, do some corroborative work, but it's something that you might really want to look at avoiding. And another aspect to consider is that if you're going to develop a case on your own experience and then facilitate it, you've got to be ready to take criticism. You've got to be ready for people to say that your decision was not a good one, or it wasn't well thought out. It was short-sighted, and that can be a very difficult thing for somebody to hear. So when you're naming your DFC, you want to give it a title that attracts the student, that is alluring, it's interesting, it gets their attention, but it doesn't reveal what happens, right? It doesn't tell them what's coming. So now that you have your story, it's time to move on to step 2. And this is to set what we call the big picture, right? So this is where you situate the students geographically, temporally. You tell us, where are we and when are we? What's the country we're operating in? What year is it? You can also, for context, throw in things like, what's the most popular movie at the time? What's the political situation back home? What's the latest in technology? Here's what a computer in 1977 looks like. So these are some things that you can throw in to get students thinking in that time and to really put them in that time frame. So step 3 is to introduce the protagonist of the DFC. This is the person whose shoes we're going to fill, or the role we're going to play. So you don't have to go to excruciating detail in describing the protagonist, but you want to give people a sense, a feel for who this person is. Maybe where they grew up, where they're from, maybe some of their previous military experience, if they've got previous deployments, maybe some military awards, but those sorts of things. Tell us who this person is so we can better put ourselves in their shoes and understand things from their perspective. Step 4 is to introduce what we call the little picture. This is the immediate context, the immediate circumstances surrounding the situation that's unfolding, right? It's going to lead to a problem, but what are all the factors, the pertinent factors kind of going on with our protagonist right now? So let's say you're doing a DFC on a platoon commander in Afghanistan who's been operating in Sangin for the last 4 or 5 months. What are the sorts of things, what are the sorts of details you need to include? Well, you need to include details about his forces, the enemy, maybe the sorts of tactics and techniques the enemy uses, the weaponry, the overall threat. You want to look at terrain, weather. A good rule of thumb is to put yourself in the role of the protagonist, see things from their perspective and go, what is pertinent here? What are the things that I would reasonably know in this situation? And whatever that answer is, go and find that information and put that into the case. That's something that you really want to think of is what are the factors that are going to play a role in the decision to come. Something you got to keep in mind is you want to focus on the information available to the decision maker, to the protagonist at the time of the decision. You're almost never going to have all the information you want when you're developing a DFC. As a developer, it'd be a good idea to take down notes and to record things that come up in the teaching of a case that need to be researched. That's part of the joy of DFCs. They're living documents. They improve, they are refined over time. You want to end step 4 with the problem. This is the dilemma, this is the challenge that the student needs to try to solve. Whatever comes before it, you've got to have the problem at the very end. That leads to step 5. Step 5 is posing your decision-forcing question. What now, Sergeant? What now, Lieutenant? What are you going to do? In addition to communicating their decision, you can also ask students to provide you with a product, a plan of some sort, a sketch, right? A casualty evacuation plan, a patrolling order, a night attack plan, something like that. They have to give you a decision. That's something that's required. It's part of what makes a DFC. But on top of that, you can ask them to give you something, to produce something that they're going to share as part of their brief of what they're going to do. For your 6th and final step, you're going to provide the historical outcome. This is what actually happened. We often call this the Paul Harvey moment. He was a famous radio broadcaster, and he would tell these really compelling stories. And at the conclusion of his story, he would say, and now you know the rest of the story. So you're giving that, you're providing the rest of the story to your students. You don't have to do that. You could hold back on telling the story if you wanted them to go research it. You wanted them to keep thinking about it. That's a popular technique among some case teachers. But generally speaking, Marines like to know how the story ended, and this provides them a reference point and something that they can compare and contrast their decisions to at the end of the case. So you give that Paul Harvey rest of the story moment at the end of the case. That's your last step. You should also keep in mind that not all DFCs end on a good note. In fact, there are many DFCs that end on terrible notes, where the assaulting unit gets wiped out, or the protagonist dies, or the plan that is actually put into place fails miserably. And that's okay. That's part of the benefit of doing DFCs, is you get to see how things really work out. And just like in reality, they don't always work out the way we intended. DFC developers need to keep in mind that the historical outcome is not the right answer. It's not the solution. It is simply what the protagonist did. And that's something that the developer should really emphasize to the facilitator, who in turn emphasizes that to the students. There are several formats available if you want to develop a DFC. The most typical is to use PowerPoint, Prezi, or some sort of digital presentation software. Go big on pictures and small on words. You don't want to have a lot of words on the wall. This should not look like your typical annual training class. Pictures, media, these are designed to help illustrate the case, bring it to life, draw your students in, get them deeper into the situation, the time, and also serve as a visual aid and a sense of where are we in the story for your facilitator. Developing DFCs does not have to be a daunting process. We've given you 6 steps that take you from beginning to end. You can apply these to any topic, any subject to develop a DFC. And as you go through these and you get practice in them, it gets easier. It's like any skill. The more you do something, the better at it you get. So take these steps, apply them, try them out, and develop a DFC for your students and see how just effective they can be.